The fluorescent lights of Pinnacle Solutions' executive floor flickered faintly, casting a sterile glow over the glass-walled offices and polished marble corridors. It was late, well past 8 in the evening, and the Atlanta skyline sparkled through the towering windows, a glittering contrast to the quiet hum of the nearly empty building. Down one of the hallways, James Carter pushed a cleaning cart, the wheels squeaking softly against the floor. He was a man in his mid-50s, his dark skin weathered by years of hard work, his salt and pepper hair cropped close. His navy janitor's jumpsuit was neatly pressed, but it hung loosely on his lean frame, and his slight limp, a remnant of an old injury, gave his movements a measured rhythm. To anyone passing by, he was just another custodian, part of the invisible machinery that kept the corporate tower gleaming. But James's eyes, sharp and steady, held a depth that hinted at more experience, more resolve, more secrets than his mop and bucket suggested. Pinnacle Solutions was a powerhouse, a tech firm known for its cutting-edge software and ruthless ambition. The office was all sleek lines and modern opulence, the kind of place where deals were sealed over $1,000 lunches and egos were as polished as the mahogany conference tables. James had been here for 4 months, hired through a temp agency, his application buried in a stack of others. He kept to himself, nodding politely to the security guards, exchanging small talk with the other night shift workers. But every night, as he wiped down desks and emptied trash cans, he was listening, watching, piecing together the undercurrents of a company he knew better than anyone. He'd overheard snippets of boardroom drama, caught the names of executives in hushed elevator talks, felt the weight of dismissive glances from suits who didn't bother to learn his name. And tonight, something in the air felt charged, like the calm before a storm. As James steered his cart toward the executive wing, a voice boomed from the corner office, sharp and impatient. The door was ajar, the nameplate reading, Daniel Hargrove, Regional Director. Hargrove was a bear of a man, his tailored suit straining against his broad shoulders, his voice a weapon he wielded without care. James had seen him plenty, striding through the office, barking at assistants, ignoring the cleaning crew unless a spill needed mopping. To Hargrove, James was less than a shadow, a necessity as unremarkable as the light fixtures. But James had heard enough to know Hargrove's reign was built on fear, not respect, and that made him dangerous, and vulnerable. Hargrove's voice cut through the glass walls, mid-rant to someone on the phone. "I don't care how late it is, get it done. If we lose this client, heads will roll." The call ended with a slam, and James paused, his mop still, just out of sight. He'd learned to move quietly, to blend in, but tonight, Hargrove's agitation was louder than usual. The man stormed out of his office, his face flushed, his tie loosened, and nearly collided with James's cart. "Watch it." Hargrove snapped, his eyes raking over James with undisguised contempt. "What are you even doing here? This floor should be done by now." James kept his gaze low, his voice calm. "Just finishing up, sir. Didn't mean to get in your way." His hands rested lightly on the cart, but his mind was already turning, noting the sweat on Hargrove's brow, the edge in his voice. Something was off, and James was ready to find out what. James Carter maneuvered his cleaning cart through the dimly lit corridors of Pinnacle Solutions, the squeak of its wheels echoing faintly in the near-empty executive wing. The Atlanta skyline glittered beyond the glass walls, a distant hum of city life contrasting with the sterile silence of the office tower. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting stark shadows across the marble floor, where James's reflection moved alongside him, a solitary figure in his navy janitor's jumpsuit. His limp was subtle but noticeable, a quiet reminder of battles fought long ago, and his hands, calloused but steady, gripped the cart's handle with a calm that belied the storm brewing inside. Hargrove's sharp rebuke, "What are you even doing here?" still rang in his ears, not because it hurt, but because it was so familiar. James had heard that tone before, from men like Hargrove who saw him as less than a cog in their machine, easily replaced. But James wasn't here to be dismissed. He was here to watch, to wait, and tonight, the cracks in Hargrove's armor were starting to show. He pushed the cart toward the service closet, passing glass-walled offices where monitors glowed with spreadsheets and emails left open in the rush of the day. The executive floor was a ghost town now, save for the faint clatter of a keyboard from one office and the occasional murmur of a late-night call. James's eyes, sharp despite the late hour, caught every detail: the crumpled coffee cups in the trash, the scrawled notes on a whiteboard, the tension in the air that lingered like a bad aftertaste. He'd been at Pinnacle for 4 months, long enough to know the rhythms of the place, long enough to hear the whispers of discontent among the staff. Hargrove's name came up often, in the break room, in the elevators, always with a mix of fear and resentment. The man ruled with an iron fist, quick to berate, slow to praise, and James had felt the sting of his disdain more than once. Earlier that day, during the lunch rush in the employee lounge, Hargrove had stormed in, his face a thundercloud. James had been wiping down the counter, unnoticed as always, when Hargrove spotted a smudge on a table and turned his ire on him. "Can't you do anything right, Carter?" he'd snapped, loud enough for the room to go quiet. "If you can't keep this place clean, I'll find someone who can." The other workers, assistants, techs, a few junior execs, had kept their eyes down, their sandwiches untouched, the air thick with second-hand embarrassment. James had nodded, muttered an apology, and gone back to work, but the moment had stuck with him. It wasn't the first time Hargrove had singled him out, but it was the first time James had heard a tremor in his voice, a hint of something deeper, pressure, maybe, or desperation. Now, as James reached the service closet, he paused, hearing footsteps behind him, quick, heavy, unmistakably Hargrove's. He turned just as the director rounded the corner, his tie now completely off, his shirt sleeves rolled up, a manila folder clutched in one hand. Hargrove's eyes narrowed when he saw James, his voice a low growl. "Still here, huh? You're slower than molasses. I told you to clear out." He gestured dismissively, his gaze raking over James's jumpsuit, his mop, his unassuming posture. "Or do you need me to spell it out for you?" James kept his expression neutral, his hands steady on the cart. "Just making sure everything's spotless, sir," he said, his voice low, deferential, but with a quiet edge that made Hargrove pause for a split second. "Wouldn't want to leave anything undone." Hargrove snorted, a humorless sound, and stepped closer, his bulk filling the hallway. "Spotless?" he mocked, his voice rising. "This place is a mess, and you're part of the problem. You think you're indispensable? I could replace you with a kid off the street tomorrow." He jabbed a finger at James, his face reddening. "In fact, why wait? You're done. Pack your stuff and get out by morning. I don't want to see your face again." The words landed like a punch, but James didn't flinch. He'd been expecting something like this, had felt it building in Hargrove's increasingly erratic outbursts. The man was unraveling, his authority a fragile shell cracking under some unseen weight. James's eyes flicked to the folder in Hargrove's hand, the papers inside slightly crumpled, as if they'd been gripped too tightly. "You sure about that, sir?" he said, his voice calm, almost too calm, a question that hung in the air like a challenge. Hargrove's eyes widened, his face twisting with incredulity. "You questioning me, janitor?" He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a venomous hiss. "You think you've got a say here? I run this place. I say jump, you jump. I say you're fired, you're gone." Understand? He leaned in, close enough that James could smell the coffee on his breath, his finger now inches from James's chest. Get out before I have security drag you out. James held his gaze, his heart steady, his mind racing. He could walk away, let Hargrove think he'd won, but that wasn't the plan. Not anymore. He'd heard enough over the past months, Hargrove's late-night calls about creative accounting, his plans to slash the custodial budget, his casual dismissal of complaints about workplace harassment. And now this, a firing born of nothing but spite and assumption. James's hand tightened on the cart's handle, but his face remained a mask of calm. I hear you, sir, he said, his voice low, deliberate. But you might want to check with the board before you make that call. Hargrove froze, his finger still raised, his eyes narrowing as if trying to parse a riddle. The board? He laughed, a sharp, barking sound that echoed down the hall. You're out of your mind, old man. The board doesn't care about some nobody janitor. You're done. He turned, striding back toward his office, the folder flapping in his hand, but his steps were less certain, his shoulders tense, as if James's words had planted a seed of doubt. James watched him go, his expression unchanged, but inside, a fire was kindling. He pulled his phone from his pocket, checking the time, nearly 9 p.m. The board meeting was tomorrow, a virtual call with Pinnacle's top brass, and Hargrove would be there, strutting his power, oblivious to the storm James was about to unleash. He opened a text thread to Elena, his longtime ally on the board, and typed, "It's happening. Tonight." He hit send, then slipped the phone back into his pocket, his limp barely noticeable as he pushed the cart into the closet. Hargrove thought he'd just fired a janitor, but he'd made a far bigger mistake. And soon, he'd regret it. The service closet at Pinnacle Solutions was a cramped, dimly lit space, its shelves lined with cleaning supplies and the faint tang of bleach hanging in the air. James Carter stood by his cart, the door half open, the squeak of its hinges still echoing as he processed Daniel Hargrove's words, "You're done." The hallway beyond was silent now, Hargrove's heavy footsteps long faded toward his corner office, but the tension lingered, thick as the Atlanta humidity pressing against the building's glass walls. James's hands moved automatically, restocking paper towels, his navy jumpsuit creased from hours of work, but his mind was a whirlwind of strategy. Hargrove's threat to fire him wasn't just a personal slight, it was a symptom of everything wrong with Pinnacle, a company James had built from nothing, now warped by men like Hargrove who valued power over people. For months of mopping floors, of blending into the shadows, had led to this moment, and James was ready to step into the light. He checked his phone, the screen glowing with Elena's reply, "Call me now." He slipped out of the closet, locking it behind him, and moved to the stairwell, where the concrete walls muffled the building's hum. The call connected on the first ring, Elena's voice crisp but urgent. "James, what happened? You're moving up the timeline." Her tone carried the weight of their shared history, years of building Pinnacle together before James stepped back, leaving her as his eyes on the board. "Hargrove just fired me," James said, his voice low, steady, but laced with a quiet fury. "Told me to clear out by morning. He's unraveling, Elena. I heard him on a call earlier, panicking about a client. He's cutting corners, pushing layoffs, and now this. It's time." Elena's breath hissed through the line. "Fired you? The nerve. All right, I've got your files, emails, recordings, the budget reports. It's damning, James. The board's already uneasy about Hargrove's numbers. This could finish him." She paused, her voice softening. "You sure you want to do this now? Once you reveal yourself, there's no going back." James leaned against the stairwell wall, his eyes tracing the cracks in the concrete. "I'm sure," he said. "I didn't come back to play janitor forever. This company's mine, and I'm taking it back." He ended the call, his heart steady, his plan crystallizing. The board meeting was in 12 hours, and by then, Hargrove's reign would be over. But first, James needed to set the stage. Back on the executive floor, the air felt heavier, the fluorescent lights casting a clinical glare over the glass offices. James pushed his cart toward the break room, where a young woman, Lila, an administrative assistant, sat hunched over a laptop, her fingers flying across the keys. Her desk was cluttered with files, her coffee long gone cold, and her face carried the exhaustion of someone working past her limits. She glanced up as James passed, offering a tired smile. "Still here, Mr. Carter," she said, her voice soft but warm. "Hargrove's got us all burning the midnight oil." James paused, leaning on his cart, his expression kind but probing. "You're working too hard, Lila. What's he got you doing now?" She sighed, rubbing her eyes. "Reports for the board meeting. He wants them perfect, or it's my neck. He's been a nightmare lately, yelling at everyone, saying we're all replaceable." She hesitated, glancing down the hall, then lowered her voice. "I heard him on the phone earlier, talking about cutting the cleaning staff. Said it's low-hanging fruit. No offense, Mr. Carter." James's jaw tightened, but his face remained calm. "None taken," he said, his voice low. "Hargrove's got a habit of running his mouth. You heard anything else?" Lila nodded, her voice dropping to a whisper. "He's nervous about the board. Keeps saying they're watching him, that he needs a big win. I don't know what's going on, but it's bad." She looked at James, her eyes searching. "You always seem so calm. How do you deal with him?" James chuckled softly, a sound that carried more weight than she knew. "Patience, Lila. And knowing what's worth fighting for." He patted the cart, his eyes flicking toward Hargrove's office, where a light still burned. "You take care of yourself, all right? Don't let him break you." Lila smiled, a flicker of gratitude in her eyes, and turned back to her laptop. James continued down the hall, his cart rattling softly, his mind sharpening. Lila's words confirmed what he'd suspected. Hargrove was on the ropes, his confidence a facade crumbling under scrutiny. James had overheard enough. Hargrove's late-night rants about fixing the books, his plans to fire half the custodial team, his dismissal of complaints about his behavior. And now, firing James was the final misstep, a move born of arrogance and ignorance. As he neared the conference room, the long mahogany table gleaming under the lights, James heard voices, sharp, heated, coming from Hargrove's office. The door was ajar, and he slowed his cart, his mop still, just out of sight. Hargrove was on the phone again, his voice a mix of anger and panic. "I don't care what it costs, make it happen. If we lose this deal, we're done." A pause, then a lower, more venomous tone. "And that janitor, Carter, he's gone. I don't need some old man slowing me down." The call ended with a curse, and James felt a spark of indignation flare brighter. He pulled out his phone, opening the voice recorder he'd used for weeks to capture Hargrove's outbursts, and hit record, slipping it back into his pocket. The break room door creaked open behind him, and Lila stepped out, her bag slung over her shoulder, heading for the elevator. She froze when she saw Hargrove's office light, her face paling. "He's still here," she whispered, glancing at James. "He was screaming at me earlier about a missing file. I'm scared he's gonna fire me next." James stepped closer, his voice low, reassuring. "You're doing fine, Lila. Keep your head down, and let me handle this." His eyes flicked to Hargrove's door, where the man was now pacing, visible through the glass. Lila nodded, her hands trembling, and hurried to the elevator, the doors closing with a soft ding. James pushed his cart toward the conference room, his heart pounding but his resolve ironclad. He'd planned to wait until the board meeting, to let Elena present his evidence, but Hargrove's recklessness was forcing his hand. As he mopped the floor, the rhythmic swish of the mop grounding him, he heard Hargrove's door slam open, the director storming into the hall, his face a mask of fury. "Carter," he bellowed, spotting James. "I thought I told you to get out." James stopped, turning to face him, his mop resting against the cart. "I heard you, sir," he said, his voice calm, almost serene, but with a steel that made Hargrove pause. "But I've got a job to finish." The words were a quiet defiance, a spark in the powder keg, and Hargrove's face twisted, his anger boiling over. The hallway felt smaller now, the glass walls closing in, and James knew the moment was coming, the moment when everything would change. The executive hallway of Pinnacle Solutions was a tunnel of glass and steel, the fluorescent lights casting a cold, unyielding glow over the polished marble floor. James Carter stood by his cleaning cart, his navy jumpsuit creased from the long night, his hands steady on the mop handle as Daniel Hargrove loomed before him, his face a storm of rage. Hargrove's bellow, "I thought I told you to get out," still echoed, amplified by the glass walls, but James's calm response, "I've got a job to finish," hung heavier, a quiet defiance that seemed to suck the air from the space. The Atlanta skyline glittered beyond the windows, indifferent to the showdown unfolding within, and the faint hum of the building systems was the only sound breaking the silence. Hargrove's eyes blazed, his fists clenched, his tailored shirt strained against his heaving chest. To him, James was nothing, a janitor, a nobody, a loose end to be cut. But James's steady gaze, his unyielding posture, held a power Hargrove couldn't name, and it was starting to unravel him. Hargrove took a step forward, his voice a low snarl, each word dripping with venom. "You've got some nerve, Carter," he said, his finger jabbing the air inches from James's chest. "I don't know who you think you are, talking back like that, but you're done. You hear me? Done. I want you out of my building now, or I'll have security haul you out like the trash you are." His face was inches from James's now, his breath hot with coffee and fury, but James didn't flinch. He stood rooted, his mop resting against the cart, his eyes locked on Hargrove's, a quiet storm brewing behind them. The hallway felt like a pressure cooker, the tension so thick it could shatter the glass. James's voice was low, deliberate, cutting through Hargrove's tirade like a blade. "You keep saying I'm done, Hargrove, but you're not listening. You don't have the power you think you do." He paused, letting the words sink in, his gaze never wavering. "You might want to think real hard about who you're talking to before you make another mistake." Hargrove's face twisted, a mix of incredulity and rage. He laughed, a sharp, barking sound that echoed down the hall, but it was forced, brittle, betraying a flicker of unease. "A mistake," he scoffed, stepping back, his hands on his hips. "You're a janitor, Carter. A nobody. You think you can scare me with your tough talk? I run this place. I say who stays and who goes, and you're gone." He pulled his phone from his pocket, his fingers fumbling as he dialed, his voice rising. "Security, get up to the executive floor. We've got a problem." James didn't move, his hands still resting lightly on the cart, his expression unchanged. He'd expected this, Hargrove's need to assert control, to crush anything that challenged his authority. But James had been planning for this moment, gathering evidence, biding his time. His phone, tucked in his jumpsuit pocket, was still recording, capturing every word of Hargrove's meltdown. Over the past 4 months, he'd collected enough, emails forwarded from disgruntled staff, recordings of Hargrove's unethical directives, budget reports showing his reckless cuts, to bury the man. And now, Hargrove was handing him the final piece. The elevator dinged, and 2 security guards stepped out, Marcus, the night guard who'd shared coffee with James in the break room, and a newer hire, both looking tense but professional. Marcus's eyes met James's, a silent question in them, and James gave a slight nod, a gesture of trust. Hargrove turned to the guards, pointing at James, his voice booming. "Get this man out of here. He's fired, and I want him gone now." Marcus hesitated, his hand resting on his radio, his gaze flicking between Hargrove and James. "Sir, what's the situation?" he asked, his tone cautious, professional, but with a hint of doubt that made Hargrove's face redden further. "What's the situation?" Hargrove roared, stepping toward Marcus. "I just told you. He's trespassing, refusing to leave. Do your job, or you're next." His voice cracked, his desperation seeping through, and the newer guard shifted uncomfortably, glancing at Marcus for guidance. James spoke, his voice calm but resonant, filling the hallway. "Hold on, Marcus. Before you do anything, you might want to know who you're dealing with." He stepped forward, his limp barely noticeable now, his presence commanding the space. "Hargrove thinks he's in charge, but he's wrong. I'm James Carter, founder and majority shareholder of Pinnacle Solutions. And I'm not going anywhere." The words landed like a thunderclap. Hargrove froze, his phone still raised, his mouth opening but no sound coming out. Marcus's eyes widened, his hand dropping from his radio, and the newer guard's jaw dropped, his stance faltering. The hallway was silent, the hum of the lights suddenly deafening, the weight of James's revelation settling over them like a storm cloud. Hargrove's face drained of color, his hands trembling as he lowered the phone, his eyes darting around as if searching for an escape. You're lying," he stammered, his voice weak, breaking. "That's impossible. The founders, he's not." "Not what?" James cut in, his voice sharp, slicing through Hargrove's denial. "Not here. Not cleaning your floors. Not black." He took another step forward, his eyes burning with a quiet fury. "I built this company from the ground up, Hargrove. Every line of code, every contract, every brick in this building, I made that happen. I stepped back, let people like you think you could run it, but I never let go. And now I'm here, seeing what you've done to my legacy." Hargrove's knees buckled slightly, his back hitting the glass wall behind him, the manila folder in his hand slipping to the floor, papers scattering. "This is a trick," he muttered, his voice barely audible, his eyes wild. "You can't be, you're just a janitor." James shook his head, his voice dropping to a dangerous calm. "Not just a janitor, Hargrove. Never just a janitor. And you're about to find out what happens when you cross the wrong man." He turned to Marcus, his tone softening but firm. "Marcus, stand down. You don't need to escort me anywhere. But you might want to stick around for what's next." Marcus nodded, a flicker of awe in his eyes, and stepped back, the newer guard following his lead. Hargrove's face twisted, a mix of panic and defiance, as he lunged for his phone, fumbling to dial again. "You won't get away with this," he shouted, his voice cracking. "I've got people, lawyers, you'll regret this." James smiled, a small, knowing curve of his lips that sent a chill through the hallway. "Keep talking, Hargrove," he said, patting his pocket, where the recorder hummed quietly. "Every word's going to the board. And trust me, they're going to love hearing it." The guards exchanged glances, the hallway a stage now, and James stood center, ready to bring the curtain down. The executive hallway of Pinnacle Solutions was a frozen tableau, the glass walls reflecting the stark fluorescent light as James Carter stood tall, his Navy janitor's jumpsuit now a symbol of quiet power. Daniel Hargrove slumped against the wall, his scattered papers littering the floor, his face a mask of disbelief and dread. The security guards, Marcus and the newer hire, stood back, their eyes wide, the weight of James's revelation, "I'm James Carter, founder and majority shareholder," still sinking in. The Atlanta skyline glittered outside, a silent witness to Hargrove's fall. James's voice, calm but unyielding, echoed in the silence, his promise to send Hargrove's words to the board a final nail in the director's coffin. The air was electric, the moment a turning point, and James was ready to close the chapter. Hargrove's phone slipped from his trembling hand, clattering to the marble floor. You can't do this," he stammered, his voice a broken whisper. "I've given everything to this company." But his words were hollow, drowned by the truth James had laid bare. James stepped forward, his limp gone, his presence filling the space. "You gave nothing but grief," he said, his tone steady, final. "You bullied, you lied, you cut corners to save your own skin. This company's mine, and I'm taking it back." He nodded to Marcus, who moved to escort Hargrove to his office, the director's head bowed, his empire in ruins. By morning, the board acted swiftly. James's evidence, recordings, emails, budgets, was undeniable. Hargrove was terminated, his reputation shredded, his connections unwilling to touch him. James declined to resume the CEO role but took a seat on the board, guiding Pinnacle's rebirth. He promoted Lila to office manager, ensured raises for the custodial team, and launched a fund for workers like Marcus. The story went viral, trending as #PinnacleJustice, inspiring countless others to speak out. James addressed the staff, his suit replacing the jumpsuit, his voice resolute, "No one's invisible here. We build this together." The fallout reshaped Pinnacle. New policies prioritized respect, transparency, and equity. James's stand became a beacon, sparking workplace reforms beyond Atlanta. He read messages from employees, one from Lila standing out, "You showed us we matter." He smiled, replying, "You always did." This was his legacy, not just a company, but a fight for those unseen. So, what about you? Have you ever stood up when someone tried to push you down? Share your story in the comments, I'm reading every one. If James's fight moved you, hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the bell. Let's keep pushing for a world where no one's just a janitor, and every voice counts.